Hi, welcome to the IT Service Management Mentor. Let's talk about IT service sourcing. So companies need to consider about their sourcing strategy. So considerations around what the as is situation is, what the future sourcing need may be, costs as well, certainly taking into account total cost of ownership, and then resource and asset scarcity. Those need to be considered, certainly from a resourcing perspective. Market considerations: what are your competition doing? What's available with vendors, suppliers, third parties? What about your customers? They all need to be forming part of your sourcing strategy, as well as what's the environment like. Is it the sector you're operating in? Is it a multi or a complex sourcing environment? Two approaches: we've got to build it or we've got to buy it. So if we just think through both of those options, there's going to be an element of bias or an element of pressure on those options either way. So certainly you need to be thinking about, are you familiar with this existing offering, this new tool or this vendor, this provider? Is that perhaps clouding judgment a little? Certainly in terms of this sales team offering, it can do absolutely everything versus the technical team reality as to, well, okay, we've maybe been told it can do X, Y, and Z, but in reality it can only do elements of it. So the sales team perhaps selling something that technically it can't really deliver. Prior experience again is a bias and is a pressure. Are you using that in the right context? Are you thinking back to a previous contract perhaps, or a previous customer where maybe you may be thinking, yes, this service provider did a good job, but are you being a little biased there? And then watch out for the impact on quality. So do it cheaper is a common driver, but you need to be mindful of the quality element. That if there's a consideration in terms of quality reduction, does that matter? Need to be aware of that. And then also the desire just to do it because it's new. Sometimes moving to a new third party or a new service, what is the real reason? What's the desire here? Is there a proper business requirement, or is it just a desire because it's a new toy? If we look at build versus buy and when to choose each option, typically if you're going to build it internally, it relies on internal knowledge. So if you've got that internal knowledge, a build will work well. If the customer demand is high, if you're in a high changing industry sector where there's a lot of moving parts and it's continually moving, continually adapting, build generally works better. Perhaps there's a very specific service and it's not a widely available offering or service or product, whatever it may be. Build it in-house may well work. Certainly in regulated environments, or there's a heavy level of compliance or legislation requirement, building it in-house certainly has some benefits there. And if your customer is growing significantly, if it's a very high change environment, very high change customer or industry, build it may work slightly better. The buy it situations, if the customer doesn't have any in-house ability or availability of resources or technical skills, buying it is a better offer. Highly specialized competencies need, if it's something that's very, very specific and very specialized competencies are needed, perhaps considering buy may work better. Also the level of maturity with your customer, whether it's highly commoditized or the customer is just saying, look, this isn't our core business activity. We're not an IT company. Perhaps we provide other services, whatever those may be. Look at that IT strategy. Look at the business strategy. Perhaps buying something may be a better approach. And certainly if it's repetitive or a predictive type of service. When you're going through your vendor selection requirement, you've got an RFI, RFQ, and an RFP. RFI typically is when you're not 100% sure what it is you actually need, but you know you need it. You want to find out who's available in the market. who would be available to assist with this, and then typically an RFI then matures and it grows into an RFQ and an RFP once you start to get more detail. RFQ, you usually know what the requirement is, and you now need to understand how would a vendor deliver it, and how's that going to impact from a cost perspective. Maybe there's a rough order of magnitude that may follow as to say, well, an indicative costing is going to be within this area plus or minus X%. And then an RFP, you've established what is needed, the problem statement, the challenge statement. It's there, it's out there. However, there's still some additional requirements needed, and you want to understand how would a particular service provider deliver that, how would they go about it, and that's the RFP. Service model topics. So this is going to be part of your overall sourcing strategy. It should include what circumstances would you go out to market? When would you consider that? What the roles and responsibilities are, particularly around governance and oversight requirements. What are those, and under what circumstances would you consider going to a build it or buy it type of approach? How will you assess proposals and RFPs, for example? What's the criteria you'd be looking at? Your service level agreements, fit for purpose, fit for use, cultural fit. What about global footprint or national footprint? How long would it take for a service provider to deliver it? What are the costs? What are the payment terms? What about policies, compliance, auditing levels, tax perhaps, or maybe the type of service being delivered? Maybe you would have a different approach to delivery of resourcing and resource assets over infrastructure. Two common sourcing options you may have already heard of is insourcing and outsourcing. Insourcing, you're already using your existing assets, your existing resources to CDS, create, deliver and support. The outsourcing model, you're transferring some of that risk and some of that responsibility of business outcomes to a vendor, and that can be further split into three other terms called onshoring, nearshoring, which is where you're perhaps in the same time zone, perhaps if you're in the UK for the sake of argument, and some of those services are being provided through Europe as an area, for example. And then offshoring is maybe that's a different continent. Perhaps you're in the UK or you're in the US, and those services are coming from India. And then finally, as we just come to an end here, really, definitions 101, when we talk about partners, that's more of a collaborative approach. So everyone's got a shared goal, shared direction, shared objectives. A supplier is more around it's providing a service. Here are the products, here are the services, but there's no shared goals, no shared outcomes, directions or objectives. And then a vendor, that is a combination of the partner and supplier. Thank you very much for listening. Please do subscribe to my channel and click like.